welcome. My name is Alexander Wurzer. We are back with the SAPI IP Business Talks. Today, we are in Ireland and in Cameroon. My guest is Joe Doyle, IP Manager at Enterprise Ireland, and one of our lecturers in our joint SAPI EPO diploma course, the University Diploma in IP Business Administration. And I'm very happy that Amele Founder Muondo Espetala is with us because she is located in Cameroon and she's one of our ambassadors of the SAPI IP Business Academy. We will talk today about IP for SMEs and startups because both of them, Joe and Amele, are in their daily practice. They deal with SMEs and with startups, and especially with all these issues around startup work and SME work with all that tricky IP topics. Joe works at Enterprise Europe. He's also quite active, like Amele, on LinkedIn. I'm very happy that Joe is now with me. And Joe, thank you very much for joining us. And my first question is, so tell us a little bit about your background and how did you came into this strange field of IP?
Hi, Alex, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and talk to you today. Yes, it is a strange world, isn't it? And my route into it was maybe a little bit strange as well. So I should probably start by saying what I'm not. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a patent attorney. I'm a former scientist, and I came into this through my work in research in a university, where I started to become involved in technology transfer, patenting some of the technologies that we were developing, and then starting a spin out company. So, to cut a very, very long story short, I learned about the IP system by getting things wrong, really. I didn't know enough about it. We were conducting, complicated research and development, and largely ignoring the IP, apart from doing the rudimentary things, what we were asked to do by the Technology Transfer Office. But when it came to commercializing intellectual property, we found that that intellectual property came up as a problem because we weren't managing it on a day-to-day basis. So I had to learn about it the very hard way. So that's some years ago. We learned some very valuable lessons, some very expensive lessons at the time. And those are the sort of lessons that you don't forget. They stay with you. So if you fast forward a few years, I joined Enterprise Ireland as a technology advisor originally, but then I moved into this role where I'm working with our client companies, and I should explain maybe what Enterprise Ireland's role and who Enterprise Ireland
Yes,
is.
please.
So Enterprise Ireland is an Irish national government agency responsible for the development of our indigenous innovating and exporting industry base. So we focus very much on companies that have global scalable opportunity that represent a global scalable opportunity. So conducting research and development, generating intellectual property, and generating knowledge-based jobs here in the economy.
Yes.
So my role in all of that is to help companies understand the role that IP plays in innovation, in growing a business and starting a business, and all the various ways that intellectual property can come up in that. We support them with some financial aid, but also with some guidance and awareness raising.
So, sounds fascinating.
So I'm not really sure why I'm here, Alex. It's by accident.
Yes, yes, yes. Now, yeah, at the end, what I try to explain to my children, so my older is 16 years old and starts to think about jobs, and I always tell him, so the best jobs in the on this planet have no description. So you you be a part of something and then it happens. So that's something different. So you cannot really learn it in a formal way. So
Yeah.
Joe, you uh, are lecturing in this new program which we developed together with the EPO. And you, in one of your lectures, you explain these IP support servers and these support infrastructure in Europe. And
Hmm.
I would say, so when I try to explain somebody out there, my neighbors, yeah, what I'm doing, so they just
Hmm.
stare at me and say, "What? I mean, what is IP?
Yeah.
What does that all mean?" And wow, this is complex, isn't it? I gave
Mm.
an interview to a big broadcast, it's a German radio broadcasting, and we talked about patterns and standard essential patterns and standards. And at the end, after 1 hour, these journalists were completely confused.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
hope it was not just because of me. It is because it is
Mm.
a complex topic, and you cannot say this is the evil thing and this is the good thing. And the cowboys with the white hats and the cowboys with the black hats, and the standards have this
Mm.
role, and patterns have this other role. So when it comes to awareness, we all have awareness about IP. We all have this experience that it is extremely difficult to explain that. So what is
Mm.
your experience about the awareness level of SMEs and startups about IP? Is that becoming better, maybe, or
Mm.
is the ignorance still extremely high? What is your feeling?
Yeah, I think first of all, on a positive note, it is improving. I think it really is improving, but it's certainly the level of awareness is certainly not where it needs to be for today's economy. The way the speed at which business is changing, innovation is changing, and the part that IP plays in that is just super rapid these days. So the awareness has always been low, and that's always been a problem, but it's just a bigger problem now. And I think certainly my personal or anecdotal experience is that startups and smaller companies are becoming increasingly aware that IP is an issue. Being aware of what to do about it is a whole other thing. So yeah, there is a huge challenge, and I certainly find that um, SMEs are enthusiastic about it. They want to do their best, but it's very hard to know where to start, and it does get complicated very quickly. So it's really important that we provide you know frameworks or guide rails for companies so that they can get started on this road and just try to get pointed in one direction, because there's so many directions that you can point in. So my personal experience of it is that awareness within smaller companies is generally low, and that's backed up by surveys done by the European Commission. I think it's the SME scoreboard or scorecard that comes out every year, and I think in that it says something like 80% of SMEs rate their own awareness of IP as average or below average.
Yeah,
So that's a
I
very
mean,
high number.
I'm 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 loving everything what you're saying because it reflects completely my experience. And people like when their experience is reflected, obviously.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
so first of all, I think many startups, and what my experience also, especially in Ireland, have a lot to do with the knowledge economy. So
Mhm.
they are anyhow IT based, software based, and
Mhm.
AI companies now. And
Mhm.
the more you deal with the knowledge economy and digitalization, the more you are affected about IP. And on the other hand, that makes it more and more complex to deal with it. So when I
Mhm.
explain, for example, to some companies here in Germany, when I say, okay, look, okay, wonderful, you have an open source license. This is great. but this is a copyright license, okay? That says nothing about the fact that your software could infringe patents on a functional level,
Hmm.
and your open source license says nothing about these patents. So, and then they stare at me and say, "What? This is unbelievable." Yeah, I said, "No,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's complex, but it's a fact."
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so um,
Hmm.
uh, and the other thing, what you're saying, and what I can only support, is also that one thing is awareness, a completely other thing is what to do now. Yeah, and
Yeah.
uh, and some of these schemes, supporting schemes, do not reflect really the supporting part. They are more on this awareness part, and I like to hear that Enterprise Ireland is really supporting the company by coping with that problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly, that's our objective. And I guess if we just step back from it, it reminds me sometimes of I heard somebody describe it as the plumbing in a house, the waterworks, as the IP system. You know, is not very sexy. Nobody really knows how it works. We know water comes in, we know waste goes out, and what happens, we don't really care. And when it works, we can ignore it. But it's when it goes wrong, everybody knows it's a big problem, and
Yeah,
it's a big
you
problem to
have the
solve.
mess.
And yeah, and this is this is what it's like with with the IP system and with IP in conversations with companies. It's very easy to talk about the visible stuff, the money they're spending on R&D, the R&D output, the prototypes, and all of these sort of things. And then we can go and we can have a conversation about the market and the product and so on. And there's that piece in between, that magical jump that goes from doing research and development to having a product in the market, or raising investment, or whatever it is. That invisible piece is hard for companies to appreciate and to internalize, and then to manage. So it and it is complicated. At one level it is complicated, but also at another level it's not so complicated. Some of the stuff, I think, when if companies obtain a certain level of understanding of what the IP system does for us. First, there are lots of different parts to it. There's, like you mentioned, your copyright is not everything. You have your potentially patentable stuff, your patented stuff, your trade secrets, your brand, all of these things. So there are a lot of different parts, but it is possible to get your head around the strategy around that, and when you need to bring in the expertise to help you to do the really complicated stuff. The
So,
problem is that
mm,
we, as I did in the past, we leave it, we don't do it until it becomes up as a problem, and then
yeah,
everything is about bringing in the expertise to fix the problem. And that's just such a terrible waste
there
of
is a
money and energy.
there's a wonderful question from Maria Beusova-Winans.
Mhm.
She says IP awareness is improving in her experience, but then she says, "Are we missing something crucial in our approach to IP education?" Okay,
Mhm.
and especially how we communicate the value of IP. And is that maybe something that it is invisible? It is an
Mm.
intangible.
Yeah.
But so I have very good experience with examples. So when I tell, for example, I'm working right now with a quantum computing company, and obviously more or less a startup, and they have lots of questions, and they need evaluation for their investors. And I showed him how valuation works, and
Mhm.
explained that, and then they learned how they can improve the value by their
Mhm.
behavior, and by their, at the end we would call it IP management. So what would you say, how can we train, educate
Mm.
SMEs in a way that they understand the value and how to improve the value of IP?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. It's a huge problem, and the problem starts a good bit earlier, unfortunately, because we have, you know, I know certainly here in Ireland, and I think it's the same everywhere. We have engineers and scientists, and financial people and legal people even coming out of university without much education in IP. So that's a big problem. That's an education problem. That is really where it starts. When it comes out, then and you're talking to a quantum computing company or a food company or whoever it is, it, and if they don't really understand the problem that they need to solve, it's very hard to identify the solution. So with different companies, it's a different context. If you're a quantum computing company, there are a lot of patents out there already in the quantum field. It's useful to know about that. But if you don't know about it, and if you're not aware of that landscape, you're operating in a vacuum. If you're a food company and you're you know you need to protect your secret recipes, you need to know about confidentiality, and you need to know what trade secrets are. You need to know about your brand and all of those things, but you don't know what you don't know. And so I think that's where the awareness raising is really important, is giving companies full exposure to the full range of the IP system, and then helping them to see what's relevant to them in their context,
Yeah,
and to focus on that, and to build up their expertise in that area. I
I
think
get.
sometimes we try to either jump straight into everyone being an expert on patents, or maybe trying to get companies to absorb too much information. It's if we can have if I don't really know what the solution is. There are a lot of IP awareness resources out there for sure, but having that broad, more strategic understanding of what role IP plays in your business, and then what can you do to manage that, is kind of, I think, the approach with companies. It is
Yeah,
it's a strategic thing, not an administrative thing.
yeah,
There's administration for sure, but it's part of your company strategy. And so in Enterprise Ireland, in recent years, we've stopped using the word IP protection. Well, not quite, but we prefer the term IP strategy. And if you
yeah.
start a conversation with a company around, what is your IP strategy, it's it's more comfortable space for them to have a conversation, because they say, okay, there's actually stuff that I can do. It's not
Mhm.
something that is out there and outside of my reach and irrelevant to me.
Yeah, and in the
So
end, so two aspects I would say are absolutely crucial here. One aspect are the investors.
hmm
So as soon as you have contact with investors, they ask about IP, and
hmm
you should have your IP strategy in place. You should have make your homework. I mean, it's a horror when you have to say, "Oh, IP is not. We have nothing to do with IP," or something like that. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
every investor, so that kills the discussion,
sure,
obviously.
yeah.
And the other thing is what Marek Buri and Martin Wilming discussing here on the chat is that at the end, the best way to learn IP is to be sued. So
Mm.
maybe it's better that you learn it not the hard way, but at the end of the day, when your recipe is gone, or when you're sued for infringement, then you learn it the hard way that IP is relevant. Yeah, so you can
Mm.
ignore it. You can also ignore taxes, but only a few for a certain time, and
Yeah,
then it will come back to you.
yeah, 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 completely. It is the best way for a lesson to be sticky is when you have to pay a lot of money to fix something. But I think there's an opportunity to avoid help companies avoid getting into that situation. I think one of the things, one of the myths that is out there, is that IP is for big companies, or well-resourced companies,
Yeah,
companies that can enforce their IP against an infringer, or whatever. And I think that's a very harmful myth. I hear it all the time. But uh, you know, say I'd be talking to a startup, or even investors sometimes. They might say, oh, it's just a small company. if they come up against a large competitor, they won't have the money to enforce their IP rights. So why do they need IP rights? And it's it's such a common line that I hear, and it's very frustrating, but it's also understandable, I suppose. But it forgets the simple fact that you can go up against a large company with protection or without protection. And which one would you choose? At least if you have some protection, you have some options. Going up against a stronger competitor with no protection is just a weaker position. And also, as you know, most things are resolved without going to court. And mostly IP is seen as an opportunity, seen as a brand of a startup with some good IP management systems in place and good security
Absolutely. And
for an investor. So it's a selling point. Yeah.
even to the larger company, by the way.
Even to the large company, especially. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
because they've got to protect their position. Yeah, yeah.
how will they behave when they see that you have a really good portfolio? Yeah.
Mm,
So
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we come to this value, so obviously in this
Mm,
case, the IP portfolio has a value for the company, whether it's a startup or it's an
mm,
SME, whatever. And we have many studies which show at least that successful companies
mhm,
are IP active companies. Okay, it's a correlation. Whether it is a
sure.
causality or not is another thing.
Mm,
So some people say, okay, the more successful a company is, the more they have the money to spend for IP.
mhm,
But
yeah.
and we can say the other way around, and it is not that clear. But is it absolutely sure that IP comes along success? So that is
Mhm.
a mission critical issue. So what kind of insights can you give us when we talk about the economic potential of IP? What is your experience
Yeah.
there?
So I think for the individual companies, I think the data are in on that. The European Patent Office and the EU IPO have economics departments that look at these, and they gather very useful data on the European SME base in particular, and that data shows that correlation. Like you say, it's not possible to draw a causative relationship, but there is definitely a correlation. So
Could you
for
excuse me,
example,
Joe?
yeah.
Could you give us in the later on after our show, in the after show party on
Mhm.
LinkedIn? Could you give us in the chat some links to that studies? That would be absolutely great.
Yeah, sure, will do. Yeah, in fact, there was a really good study. I think just last October, a joint study between the EPO and the EU IPO, which looked at startups and their likelihood of raising investment, but at seed level and Series A and Series B, and then achieving a successful exit. And just
Brilliant.
for raising Series A, Series B investment, sometimes something like 10 times more likely to raise VC
Wow.
funding.
Wow. Yeah. I
So
mean,
that
that's a signal.
it is a signal. It might be 10 times of a small number, but it's still 10 times the likelihood. So that I think that's an important message for individual companies and also for investors. Um, but in terms of the wider economy, I think there are data there as well to show that there is a there is a payback to the wider society and economy in supporting more of these companies to be better at managing their IP. Um, there was a study on high growth firms done a number of years ago, not so many years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, which I can't remember now exactly off the top of my head, but it was something like looking at it looked back at so companies that had achieved growth and high growth, they looked back at what their IP protection behavior was in the past. And they showed a correlation again between early protection of IP and future growth. And that growth the one measure of the value of that growth is the number of jobs created in the economy. That it created something like 25% of new jobs created in an economy during those high growth phases. So it's all very complicated, and because, as we said, it's an invisible sort of an activity, it's hard to put numbers around it. But these large studies are very useful with helping to kind of just bring that to the surface and show that there is actually a payback to the wider economy from these companies being successful, and their success is correlated with managing their IP effectively and from an early stage.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And um, there is so first of all, Claire Fritz did already the job. So she posted
Thanks,
the
Claire.
link to the thanks, Claire. And Claire, by the way, is at I3PM in the committee for SMEs and startups. So when somebody wants to contact I3PM, so Claire is one of the guys which are very active. Thank you very much. So, one aspect Maria brought into the chat and into the discussion is that these question of whether IP is cheap or expensive. Okay,
Mm,
so obviously the terms cheap and expensive are relative terms, and they are
mhm,
definitely not economic terms because from an economic standpoint, you come from a return of investment. You invest in something, and the question is, how good is your investment? This is not a cheap
mm,
or expensive issue. But when we talk about SMEs or startups with very limited resources, on the other hand, resources are always limited. Otherwise,
mm.
we wouldn't call it business administration. Then we call it something different. When
Sure.
it's the business of limited resources. But she says, and I think that's a very good point, that somebody IP is, as you mentioned, IP is just associated, just equal to patents, and
Yeah.
developing a multinational patent portfolio that can become quite expensive. Like, by the way, for my quantum company, but of course they need that, and they have no alternative. They have to invest that. So but they have the investors, and they that's a good deal. On the other hand, there are many companies for them patents are not really the point. So it's about branding, trademarks, copyrights,
Mm,
many things. What Maria and for example also Amele discussing a lot in their LinkedIn activities, that you should also be careful with the smaller points where you think is not. So, for example, Amele wrote a wonderful post. Whether it is a good idea or not to use the own family name, your personal name
okay.
for a company, for example. Yeah. So
Mhm.
this, let's say, smaller issues which can have a huge impact uh, to your company. And is that something what Enterprise Ireland is supporting? That kind of, also, let's call it, smaller steps, which where IP can help.
Yeah, yeah, we're certainly trying to. It's so one of the things that we do in Enterprise Ireland, we have a grant scheme of financial aid for companies to help develop an IP strategy. So very briefly, there are two grants in it. There's a smaller one, which is really just a grant to bring in some external expertise to address a discrete IP issue, to get a company on the first rung of the ladder, if you like. We have another grant that's a larger scheme, which covers some of helps the company to cover some of the cost of external expertise, but also to cover some of the cost of an internal staff member being appointed, or not a formal position, but nominated as an IP champion.
Mhm.
And so the purpose of that is to recognize semi-formally that it is an important function within the company first and foremost, so that the management of the company is saying, okay, here's this guy or girl, they're going to be the IP go-to person in the company, and so we need to invest in them in some, so we're building some capability within the company. And one of the reasons for that is to manage those small things on a day-to-day basis, so that somebody is aware that, we're going to enter a new market. We're going to start exporting in Germany or China or wherever it is. What is what is the situation around our brand, our company name, or our product name, or whatever it is? Have we got it protected? Do we know what third party brands are out there and trademarks and so on? Do we know how to search for trademarks? That internal skill in a company can be so valuable because it's somebody that's saying, maybe to the marketing department, say, well, hang on a minute now. Let's just do a quick check here. It'll take, an hour, half an hour, something, and it'll give us some information so that we're going ahead with a little bit more knowledge. And maybe we need to go and talk to our trademark attorney or something, to do some research so that you're making those business decisions with some more IP knowledge internally without always having to go outside. And I think that's critical to managing those small things because it's those small errors that accumulate over time. You mentioned, general purpose licensing, open source licenses, and so on. They're so easy to sign up for, and there's no friction in the system until you start to become successful. And it's when the company starts to become successful, starts to have profit that the competitor might be interested in, or starting to compete with other companies. That's when that's when problems arise, and that's when you need to have managed your IP along the road. And it does require an investment. It does require a cost. There is a cost with this. But if you get to that point where you're successful, and all of a sudden you hit a wall with a competitor or with a collaborator or an investor or whatever it is, it can be even much more expensive, if not impossible, to fix the situation at that point. So, it's not fair to minimize the challenge that it is for startups and SMEs to divert their very limited resources into managing IP from an early stage when really there's no problem yet. Nobody's
Yeah, yeah.
complaining, yeah.
But
But
I
yeah,
like
it's important.
very much this perspective, saying, look, what is a startup? A startup is a kind of search function. Where
Right? Yeah.
lies the product market fit?
Hmm.
Okay, and how looks like a business model which matches with this product market fit, and that generates profits. And once the startup or SME has found that sweet spot where the next market could lie in and shows that it is a profitable market, then this is the glass wall which when you reach it, yeah, you have
Hmm.
typically not the time to make the homework, not the resources, because then you start to get issues,
Hmm.
and then you get the payback from what you invested earlier to do the homework, to be safe on that point that you get the profits and not your competitors.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's when it becomes really important. If you have a company and it's never successful, you're never going to have an IP issue. It's
Exactly,
it's
exactly.
it's when
You
you when
just
you have
die.
when you achieve that. Sorry.
Your company is just dying. It's gone.
Yeah.
It's over.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 I mean, that's the market economy. It's okay. It's
Yeah.
it's it's okay to fail. That's
But you have to be
simply
ambitious. You have to say, yeah, we are going to be successful. And
so.
we're preparing for that time when we will be successful, that we will be able to sit across the table from an investor and say, yes, this is what our IP strategy is. Okay, we haven't got a large portfolio of patents, but look, here's our trade secrets policy. Here are our preliminary filings. Whatever you
Absolutely.
can do within your resources, be sure to do that, and you're probably going to be a few steps ahead of a few of your competitors at least.
Absolutely. That, and I mean, an IP strategy does not mean that you have all these things done. You
Hmm.
you know what to do at the different stages of your development, obviously.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
One very interesting question, which comes from Maria again. She points to your work in the ISO Innovation
Mhm.
Management Standard Committee, and she asked whether standardization of IP management practice, because maybe you know we have in Germany also
Mhm.
a nice little standard about IP management, the quality of IP management, and the question is, can that contribute to the competitiveness of European companies when they implement the thoughts and the logics of these quality standards on IP management?
Yeah, I think you'd have to hope that it would. Yeah, because I suppose what the standards aim to do is to give an agreed framework to reduce the complexity, like you mentioned earlier, that this is a complex area. It affects a lot of different parts of the business. So what the standards attempt to do is to give a framework, some agreed principles. It's not going to give you a step by step, you do this, you do A, you do B, you do C, but it compartmentalizes a very complex landscape into different areas of activity. And you say, okay, I need to do something in this area with some guidance from the standard on that, whether it's around the financing and parts of your company that you wouldn't think that IP would have a part to play. Um, it helps the company to put in processes that are there to anticipate IP challenges and to gather information as the company is innovating and doing research and development. So it's about helping a company to be systematic about what it's doing, which has got to bring efficiency with it, really, because if as we've said a few times, if it's left in the wild, it's just going to pop up as a problem. So the standards are there to try and tame that somewhat, to give companies some guidance on putting a systematic process in place within whatever the resources that the company allow, and to build that as the company grows in a
Yeah,
systematic way. You know, there's a debate on whether it should be certified or not, that there are pros and cons with it. But I think one thing that the standards help to do is to make companies aware that IP should be built into their development process, not an outcome of it, if you know what I mean. That you're designing for protection, that you're doing your R&D with protection in mind, rather than doing your R&D and then thinking, oh, I wonder, do I have anything to protect in there? It's
exactly,
it's
exactly.
hopefully a reminder, and I think that's got to be more efficient.
These throwing alleged inventions over the fence.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, I
indeed.
mean, I mean, what I try to these to explain is you can do your bookkeeping however you want.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's your business, and when you want to do your bookkeeping in this or that way, why not?
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, you have to be very clear which kind of taxes you have to pay. And when your bookkeeping is freestyle or left in the wild, you will get a huge problem to explain the tax authorities how you determine your tax. And
Hmm.
then the tax authority will react. So it pops up as a problem. Yeah.
Hmm.
So we have accounting standards for good reasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
Transparency, giving a framework. And so I see the IP issue in the same way that like the financial issues and the financial accounting standards. So I want to ask you one question which pops up here. Unfortunately, I don't know who it is, but the question is very, very interesting. This LinkedIn user asked, which services or assistance would you like to see from patent attorneys for your Irish clients?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. All right. What's a good answer to a good question? Um, yeah, if we go to your accounting example, accountants don't come. cheap either, right? So if you reach the end of your tax year and all of your documentation and your receipts and your invoices are all over the place, your accountant is going to spend many more hours trying to fix that for you. I think patent attorneys find themselves in that situation very often. They're trying to extract information from people's heads, from poorly documented processes and so on. So it would, you know, it would be great if you could go to a patent attorney's website and download a, a an internal IP audit checklist, and that every company could use that checklist so that when they engage with the patent attorney, that it's quicker. Patent attorneys are very busy people. They can't go into companies educating them, and so on. So that's what I find is a barrier to companies engaging with patent attorneys, is that the companies don't really know what the patent attorney is going to ask them for, and their information is very disorganized. So it happens from time to time that a patent attorney will come and do an IP audit with the company. Those sort of services are really valuable to companies.
Okay,
Maybe
so
it
what you
means that the
say,
IP audit will say there's nothing patentable here.
so
Okay.
what you say is, so my understanding is that and this is absolutely my point. When patent attorneys ask this question, which was asked by an individual, I don't know
Hmm.
at the moment, so then it's the direction of IP management. So help the companies with IP management and don't reduce everything to the question, do you have an invention and how can I patent it? Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
this is very often not the helpful thing for the company because they don't have an invention, or this invention patent issue is not the issue for the company. Yeah.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, this is maybe the only IP professional they know. And so they think they should talk with a patent
Yeah.
attorney. So typically the answer lies in IP management, what might be
Yeah.
helpful, and not, let's say, just filing a patent and searching for inventions. That
Yeah.
is
I, th-
that.
I think in fairness to patent attorneys, they probably spend a lot of their time, dealing with inquiries that may never lead to real business for them, because they have a business to run too.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure it would benefit the patent attorney industry if companies were more organized in collecting their own information before they ever engage with the patent attorney.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah, and this
hard to
is
know who
content
bridges
marketing.
that gap.
I mean, that is content marketing. This is exactly what I'm doing with the law firms and
Yeah.
with the IP experts. I help them. So I had a wonderful discussion with Maria. So Maria is helping so much companies, and to a certain extent, what that means is reducing the overhead to come to business for
Hmm.
the lawyer, for the attorney. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
not necessary to make it on an individual case to case basis with lots of time. So when you have this experience, you can create your content and deliver it and say, okay, as you said, to help the companies to come with, let's say, prepared questions,
Yeah.
which then have the value, the answer has the value that they are willing to pay for it,
Yeah.
obviously. Yeah. Ah, wonderful. Yeah, Maria says learn to ask the right questions.
Yes, well, they say there are no wrong answers, but there are definitely wrong questions. Sometimes people are asking the wrong question. You can always get the wrong answer with the wrong question.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, that is a tricky issue. And
Mm.
one final question, please, short answer, because
Sure,
we
I'll
we,
do
we
my
have not
best.
so much time anymore. Minute. Amelia says when IP management has a lot of facets, of obviously.
Mhm.
And what would you say from a perspective of SME and startups? How important would you say is having an IP risk management in place?
Okay, for a startup. So I think that's possible to get very complicated on that very early on. I think try to identify what the key pinch points are in your IP strategy and manage the risks around that. As a company grows, you will need a risk management strategy for sure, but there is a risk of becoming overly complicated too quickly. Now, I don't want to say that companies shouldn't manage risk. That's not what I mean. But know what your priorities are and try to manage those.
On a case-to-case basis at the end. They have to survive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Joe, thank you very much. I have the
Alex.
feeling we could talk for hours, so I definitely will invite you again. And we had a wonderful discussion on the chat. So please stay tuned with the after show party on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us, and to the audience, we have now a summer break of 3 weeks, and we will be back in 4 weeks or early September. We come back with the next SAP IP Business Talks. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good time.